President, I move notice of motion private business number 2 standing in my name, namely that I have leave to introduce a bill for an Act to amend the Return to Work Act 2014.
Seconded. Ms Franks. I put the question. Say aye. Against. Say no. It's carried.
Work Act 2014.
The Honourable Ms Franks.
Thank you, Mr President. I rise to introduce this bill. Thank you, Mr President. I rise today to introduce this bill that would extend workers' compensation benefits to cover COVID-19. This is a Greens bill that is being introduced today that I understand that the Labor Party in the other place have introduced something in the similar framework. I note that this bill was being drafted by the Greens and indeed announced in other states, in other jurisdictions, most notably New South Wales, some weeks ago, because we believe that no one deserves to be left behind during the COVID-19 outbreak. The legislation that I bring to this council today is based on the work of New South Wales Greens parliamentarians, and in particular the Honourable David Shoebridge, and I'm proud of my colleague for championing the rights of vulnerable workers in that state and pleased to follow in his footsteps here today. But I also associate myself with the very fine work of the Labor Party on this issue and raising an awareness that indeed we have to bring all workers with us in these extraordinary times. We are expecting a lot from those who we eulogise and create heroes hotels for. Well, along with that and along with the rhetoric needs to go real workplace rights, particularly where they fall ill and the harm that can come to them from those working roles. Too many workers don't have the leave entitlements and job security to allow them to economically survive a diagnosis of COVID-19, or even to take the time off work while they're awaiting test results. Frontline staff in people-facing industries are among the most vulnerable, given the required interactions with hundreds of people a day. But they often have very few legal protections, and should one of those interactions make them sick, they need the legislation that the Greens are bringing before this place today, or indeed the ALP legislation in the other place. It would extend workers' compensation coverage to workers who contract or are suspected to have contracted COVID-19. The Greens want to make sure that workers who are affected by coronavirus are supported through this public health emergency in an appropriate way. This is a simple and straightforward proposal, which we hope to see the rest of the chamber support. Certainly we know that Labor have announced, as I say, that similar legislation, and we would support theirs as well. The significant benefit of this particular bill that we are proposing today is that it can be enacted quickly, as the government doesn't have to create a new payment scheme and will be dealing with the existing frameworks for providing that workers' compensation and addressing this particular need for workers to be supported. No worker should suffer financially because they got sick at work or had to isolate because of work, and they are indeed providing us with essential services. We should provide them with the supports that they need in that situation. I note that yesterday in question time the Treasurer noted that with regards to the announcement by the Labor opposition to legislate in this area, that he'd been approached by employers fearing this move. And he went to great lengths to say that people had been contacting him, worried about the implications of affording workers compensation when it came to COVID-19. Yet on Twitter last night, the Honourable Rob Lucas, the Treasurer, was disappointed that PMAL/Labor was playing politics and scaring nurses, claiming that they're not covered by workers' compensation for COVID-19. His claim untrue, tweeted the Treasurer, and they know it. If you contract COVID-19 at work, you are covered. A response to that particular tweet asking why the disease had not been declared under the relevant education award clauses was not responded to, and indeed it wasn't made clear how a worker, in particular a nurse, who's already covered and afforded workers' compensation in some situations, was then leading to employers fearing the implications of making that rightful protection, that rightful entitlement to those that we laud and applaud and provide heroes hotels for, why we were not making it a simpler process and indeed a streamlined and retrofit process to address this pandemic. This bill will apply to full-time, part-time, contract and casual workers. It covers workers who are off work having been diagnosed with COVID-19, workers who are self-isolated and awaiting COVID-19 test results, casual workers who are tested for or diagnosed with COVID-19 within 21 days of last working, and importantly, workers who die from COVID-19. The Greens' proposed changes will cover all workers in industries where there is a significant face-to-face or public interaction role, such as education, health, hospitality and retail industries. The COVID-19 outbreak has highlighted to us just how much we depend on these workers, that they are essential workers, that we are requiring them to go above and beyond in terms of endangering their public health to keep our economy and our society going. And they certainly need the protections that we can afford them. In some cases, it would, of course, be difficult or even impossible to determine exactly when and where a worker contracted COVID-19, even with all the best tracing in the world. However, economic protection is needed now for these vulnerable workers in these public-facing jobs. The legal changes in this bill will provide that essential protection for them and for the broader public using that same presumptive provision that already exists under this Act, and indeed exist for firefighters, another initially Greens initiative, a good idea that found support of all in this parliament in, I would say, not good time, but in time. We also recognise that there are workers out there who have already found themselves in this situation, and so we have made a commencement of this Act to be retrospective to ensure that they are also able to access that appropriate compensation. The industries covered in this bill include hospitality, healthcare, disability care, aged care, childcare, education, including preschool, school and tertiary education, provision of refuges, halfway houses or homeless shelters, retail, passenger transport services, freight transport services, library services, and, of course, the obvious emergency services, including the SAMFS, the SACFS and the South Australian State Emergency Service. The proposed legislation also applies to members of the police force, those employed by a court or tribunal or who are employed in the correctional institutions that currently could indeed create quite significant issues for COVID-19 to spread, and particularly where their work requires face-to-face interaction with the public. Workers will be able to, under this bill, receive the standard rate of workers' compensation under the Act, and payments will continue until 21 days after a worker has been cleared of the disease or they have returned to work. This legislation, finally, Mr President, also considers that worst-case scenario where a worker dies having contracted COVID-19 in the course of their employment. That presumptive protection, that ease of accessing their entitlements will then come into play should this bill pass, and will ensure that any dependents of that worker will be eligible to receive those death benefits. With those words, I commend the bill to the Chamber.